Now start our webinar. So my name is Sebastian Cater. I'm Head of UK Theatre and Workforce Development, and I'm introducing to you today David Rees, who's Director of Consulting, and Francesca Di Nuzza, who is Senior Consultant, both from Baker Richards. And we are very happy to have them here on our first Theatre Means Business webinar. We're also very happy to have you all here as attendees of this webinar. And just to check, you can hopefully see from the screen, let me just move my Q&A box. We are about to present to you Reboot, Your Baseline for Recovery. Just to give you some housekeeping messages, so this webinar should last about 90 minutes. Anyone who's attending it, you won't be seen or be able to speak, but you can ask questions typing into the Q&A box, which should be at the bottom of your screen. You can ask as yourself. You can also ask questions anonymously if you wish, so just check the box when you're entering your question. There's some questions that people have previously sent, which is great, so they were submitted at the point of registration, so we'll go through those at the end if they haven't been covered. And also just to confirm that we are recording the webinar and we'll circulate it to attendees afterwards. And this recording will also be archived on the Theatre Means Business website. We have a SOLT and UK Theatre team on hand to handle any technical issues, so hopefully there won't be any, but we have a team here just to support this, just in case. Just before we launch in, just to give you a bit of context for this webinar and this series of webinars through Theatre Means Business, obviously we're in pretty strange and unusual times, pretty challenging times during lockdown. Society of London Theatre, otherwise known as SOLT, and UK Theatre, we wanted to respond to this situation and find new ways to support the sector during this period. Traditionally, we run training courses, events and conferences in real life, but obviously these can't happen at the minute. So as a result, we created theatremeansbusiness.info, a website which contains a range of learning and information webinars to equip the theatre sector with the tools it needs to rebuild itself. The majority of you should have come through that route, but others may have found out about this webinar through other routes, but we welcome you however you've come to us. Just to give you a quick summary about the session today, the main themes really are income generation being really key to our sector's survival. And the Baker Richards team today are going to give you some thoughts on how to be resourceful with your endeavours in this area. Just to briefly let you know about SOLT and UK Theatre membership. SOLT and UK Theatre are two of the leading theatre and performing arts membership organisations in the UK. Membership of these organisations enables us to support you and your needs, and for us to support the wider sector. There's a lot of work we've been doing recently on lobbying governments to make COVID-19 funds and schemes available and to make sure that they work for our sector. Your support as members also enables us to create initiatives like theatremeansbusiness.info. If you're already a member of SOLT UK Theatre, thank you for your continuing support. Or to find out more about membership, visit uktheatre.org. As I mentioned, we are very grateful today to David and Francesca, who've made time to join us. So I would now like to invite David and Francesca to take it away.
Great. Well, thank you, Sebastian. Let me see if I can just take over. So Francesca's sharing her slides at the moment, so I'm just going to request remote control. Just get used to this technology. Here we go. Is that working now, Francesca? Have I got control of your screen?
I think so. It's a bit scary.
Great. All right. Well, I promise not to open anything. I shouldn't. So, as I say, yeah, quick introductions then. As Sebastian says, I'm David Rees, the Director of Consulting at Baker Richards. I've been there for over 10 years now. And this is my colleague, Francesca Di Nuzza, who's one of our senior consultants, who's been with us for over kind of 5 years, I think now. Just a bit more information about kind of Baker Richards for those of you who are perhaps less familiar with us. We were founded in 2006 by Tim Baker and Debbie Richards, who many of you will know. But in fact, recently, actually just literally a few weeks before the current crisis, they actually have, by complete coincidence, sold the company to us, the employees. So they set up an employee ownership trust. So Baker Richards is now owned by the kind of the staff. We have a new chief exec who is Robin Fenwick-Cantrell, who I'm sure many of you will also know, and who's also actually going to be involved in kind of 2 more of these webinars for Theatre Means Business with me and Francesca in the coming weeks. So Baker Richards is now owned by a trust. We exist for the benefit and sustainability of the sector, as we've always done. Our own motivation is not profit for profit's sake. And just kind of our mission, kind of remains the same. What we do is we help cultural organizations achieve their financial potential, specializing in ticket pricing, membership, segmentation. We've worked for over about 700 projects now, including kind of many of the world's leading cultural attractions, as you can kind of see from a selection of our kind of clients there on that list. I think it's worth saying kind of what's special about the sector is that cultural organizations kind of have 3 sets of objectives. The artistic, so the kind of work that you want to do, the social, the kind of people you work for, and the financial. And so what we kind of found is that obviously we're not kind of outright commercial in this sector. It isn't about profit. It's about making sure that you can pay to meet those other 2 objectives. So to mean that you can put on the work that you want to put on for the people that you want to come. But where we come in is that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be using commercial techniques to kind of maximize your income for reinvestment in your art and your audiences. So today we've got the first of, I think, 3 webinars that we're doing. We've starting with Reboot, kind of basic look at the key income sources that you can kind of turn to during this period, strange times that we live in. And then we've got a session coming on segmentation and then planning and forecasting all the way in June. And just worth saying that while obviously they are linked to some extent, we've designed them to work as standalone sessions as well. So any of your colleagues that haven't attended this one who may want to join in future, feel free to do so. So before we start, I think it's probably worth talking about the elephant in the room. So the elephant in the room being that right now we're currently closed. Most of the country's closed, and really we don't know how long that's going to last. So having a quick look at some of the kind of plans for easing lockdown across the world, we're kind of beginning to see an early pattern emerge for the end of lockdown. This is actually a screenshot from a joint European roadmap towards lifting the COVID-19 containment measure from the EU. And it kind of sets out a kind of rough timeline for when certain activities can kind of likely to be put back in kind of place. So obviously the one that we're most interested in, if I click there, is this one at the bottom, the mass gatherings, so festivals and concerts. And it's the 4th and final category of activity to be permitted. And that's following other types of commercial activity. And the caveat with those is that appropriate social distancing measures are in place. And we'll talk today about what that means for kind of the sector that we're in. Currently, some European countries, Belgium and Denmark, I know are planning to allow, so far, planning to allow mass gatherings of more than 500 people, potentially from September. But of course, that is very much subject to review. For the lack of our own UK roadmap at the moment, this is just a picture of the Irish government's quite lovely illustration of their phased reopening, which follows 5 phases. Let's quickly have a quick look at the cultural and social area, and you'll see that actually where we are in their roadmap is phase 5, each phase is 3 weeks, starting on the 18th of May. So that means the earliest that theatres will be opening in Ireland is the 10th of August. So assuming that we will do something similar, it's not necessarily going to be in the short term. And if you look in more detail, there's the big caveat again around opening theatres and cinemas where social distancing can be maintained. And as I say, we will come back to talk about this throughout this presentation. So right now, where are our audiences? We all have a lot of empty theatres. So they're certainly not at our venues. Everyone is at home, but they're still connected digitally. Except, of course, the digital world is vast, and there is clearly much more competition for attention in what is an increasingly flooded market. You've got the likes of Amazon Prime, Apple TV, and Netflix. I think the latest stat I saw on Netflix was that almost 16 million people created Netflix accounts in the first 3 months of this year, which is double the number of new signups they had this time last year. So clearly, with people being at home, Netflix is something they have turned their attention to. But in the cultural sector, we're still staying connected in some really innovative ways. Just a few examples here. This is from the RSC, who are asking people to hashtag share your Shakespeare, which apparently has received over 1,000 different submissions from around the world. And just for fun, here's one of my favorites. I'll let you read the little quote from it. But of course, no hashtag share your Shakespeare tribute would be complete without an exit pursued by Bear. Here is another example from Manchester's Royal Exchange, who have collaborated with rapper, beatboxer, and theatre maker Testament to create Connect Fest, which is described as a theatre show, a music festival, and a soap opera rolled into one. It's all being done digitally. The first of those episodes is coming out next week, and then there's a series of 5 after that. And then, of course, there's the National Theatre, who have been streaming their shows kind of for free online. One Man, Two Governors with James Corden attracted more than 2.6 million viewers over its week-long run, which is huge numbers. And so here's the thing, though. Of course, the initiative was launched for free, and people were asked to donate. In total, the theatre received about £100,000 in donations, which obviously was very welcome. But if you do the maths, 2.6 million views, £100,000, that's actually less than 4p per view. So potentially not a sustainable model, but clearly an audience is there. But if we have a look at actually the kind of Google search trends for theatre over the last 90 days. This is just an example of the popularity of the search term in Google search engine, where 100 is the kind of the peak of popularity and 0 is a kind of nobody searching for it. Kind of up until the lockdown, it's kind of roughly around the 50 kind of mark. You can see the blue line there, kind of peaks a bit just after March, and then kind of as soon as lockdown hits, it kind of tails off with a few peaks. The peaks being actually the National Theatre. So the first peak is the announcement that theatres will close, then there's the lockdown, and then there's a little peak for the National Theatre. So whilst there is still a lot of activity going on, it's certainly not the same level, and the interest in generally searching for theatre is down during the lockdown period. So there is currently a lot of questions and really not a lot of answers. The one thing that we can say is that everyone's currently behaving atypically in response to what we hope is a relatively temporary force majeure. And there are a lot of unknowns, which means decision making is really difficult. We don't really know what we're planning for in the forthcoming weeks and months, hopefully not years, but we need to think about the long term as well. So I thought I'd share with you this diagram that I came across recently. Some of you might already be familiar with it. It's called now apologies to Welsh speakers for my pronunciation here, but it's called a Neven diagram. It was developed about 20 years ago by a guy called Dave Snowden as a decision-making framework to deal with real-world problems of various complexity. So there are 4 edges around the diagram, and they are in relation to any kind of a way a situation can be diagnosed. So you can respond accordingly and avoid the disorder which sits at the middle of the diagram. The situations range from the obvious down at the bottom kind of right of the diagram, where we can rely on kind of best practice. We've already seen the things that work to deal with those problems, and we can kind of categorize them and respond accordingly. But then kind of going around the diagram, kind of anti-clockwise to the bottom left, you'll see that's where we've got the chaotic. And that definitely requires different approaches. I think it's probably fair to say that right now the unprecedented territory we're in does fall under that kind of chaotic quarter. So in this context, searching for the right answers is pointless. There are no known historical patterns that we can look at to kind of get some sense of what we might do and how we might respond. Instead, what we're doing is acting. But we're acting to try and establish some kind of order. So what we're trying to do is see kind of what works, and then in doing so, move from the chaotic into the kind of the quarter above that, the complex, so that we turn what is a kind of novel response into a emergent kind of practice based on kind of what is working, what are we finding that kind of is sticking here. And actually, interestingly, the chaotic kind of quarter is the best place for innovation. And clearly this is what kind of our industry is best at. So it's actually, this is really kind of a great time to start doing things differently, which obviously could and will no doubt have a very profound effect on your entire business strategy. So having passed through the kind of first wall of the storm, it's essential to kind of like take stock of where we are right now. And start thinking about where we want to go next. And this is where I'm going to hand over to my colleague Francesca to talk about the detailed understanding of your earned income streams, which will kind of help to concentrate the kind of limited resources on the areas of the greatest impact to your bottom line, on what the current crisis means for each of these going forwards, and what you can do to kind of maximize your income in each of these areas. So if I hand over to Francesca, I will give up control.
Let's see.
Over
you
to
did,
Francesca.
Okay. I've got control. Oops. Got it. Oops, 1 second. Yeah. Okay. Yes, it worked. Great. Thanks, David. As David mentioned, if our focus for the next bit of this webinar is to think about ways to maximize earned income. And to do that, we need to come up with an integrated approach, something that we've called AAA. Most organizations generate revenue from customers from 3 key areas. They all start with an A, hence AAA. Admissions or ticket sales, and affiliations, things like membership, subscriptions, donations, and so on, and ancillary sales, so things like programs, food and beverage, interpretation, merchandise. Obviously, the proportion of income generated by each of the area will vary by organization. But I think right now the model probably looks a little bit like this. Canceling shows means that there's very little income from admissions, although some things are still on sale for a few months from now. And obviously having closed the venues, that means that there's very little ancillary coming in from the bars and the cafe and the programs. There is still a little bit of affiliation income coming from donations, for example, but the overall contribution from that income stream has significantly reduced. So obviously this is about sort of kind of oversimplifying the situation for the sector, but broadly we're looking at a reduced model in terms of income. That is not to say that there aren't ways, as David was saying, in which organizations are engaging with audiences. They are still there, they're just not in the venue. There are these, in addition to the examples that David provided, there are some others available, like streaming platforms. These are examples from the US and Europe, things like the Opera Vision platform, which we want to bring up because, you know, in a way, can't help but thinking that the fact that there's so much out there for free could have an impact in the medium and long term for us. Now, it's obviously important that the sector adjusts to the situation, and going online with lots of free content apparently was one way to do that. But I think we need to think about the implications that will have on audiences, on audience perception. So will audiences become more accustomed to not paying for stuff, for performances? And what we know from things like consumer psychology research, but from experience as well, that free is a really powerful message in terms of attracting customers, but then it's a really difficult one to come back from. This will be difficult to convert customers to pay even small amounts when we need them to pay. So because we know that we're going to be in this situation for a little longer, then it might well be that organizations will need to continue to rely on digital if organizations that have the capacity to do that. So it might be that at some point we will still be working on a sort of in a hybrid system where there's some customers are in the venue and some others are joining online, which might be a really good thing. But then if that's going to be the case for a lot longer, then shifting away from the free model becomes even more important if we expect demand to come from that. It doesn't have to be free. This is an example from the American Shakespeare Center in the US. They are streaming their productions online on the platform, and you still have to buy a ticket to get access to the streaming link. They do it in a really clever way, where they recommend a range of amounts for that ticket, from a minimum of $10. And it's in the form of a donation, and they ask you to pay the price that works for you depending on how many people might be watching. So this is, in this way, they are still attaching some sort of value to that experience, and potentially they're reaching an even wider audience that could ever fit into their auditorium or could ever travel to their venue. And all of this while still generating income. So I think this is something worth thinking about. From a revenue perspective, for sure, but I think importantly from a value perspective, what value are we attaching to these experiences? And this is something that streaming services like digital theater, or obviously the likes of Netflix and Disney Plus and so on, have been doing, where they offer a monthly subscription to get access to a selection of theater productions or series and TV shows. So again, this is important because it's sending a message that there is value to these performances, and we know that people value what they pay for. It's not to say that we need exceptional measures during this time to keep going and importantly to stay top of mind with our audiences. But I think again, it's worth reflecting on the impact that this overflow of free content will have on the long run. In the long run. So actually, maybe the model looks a little bit more like this, where there is some income coming from admissions in the form of paid online content, but ultimately we want to get back to a situation where we can maximize each of the three A's, each of the three areas. Now, to do that, we need to keep in mind that not every pound is equal. Not every £1 of income is equal. Sometimes £1 is worth less. Sometimes £1 of income is worth more. It depends on how much control you have on each of the verticals, on each of the A's, and on the cost structure. So the key, and I think this is one key takeaway from today, is that the key to maximizing income will be to leverage the income sources that are the most profitable ones, so that where more income is being retained. So if you take admissions, for example, and there's a little bit of math going on there, so bear with me. But if you've got a show that's is being presented on an 80-20 deal, then an extra, and it's clear that an extra pound of income is worth 20p. And if you can charge a little, like a ticket fee on top of that, they'll be worth a little bit more than 20p to a presenting venue. So, and that is, it's not even I would say a net margin, because you've obviously have got overheads and marketing costs and so on. But at the same time, though, even if the margin is relatively low, then once everything is in place and the show is on sale, then selling every extra ticket has very little incremental cost, very little marginal cost. So the overall, any more tickets that you can sell add to the marginal profitability. If you do run things like your own catering, then let's say a bar that is operating on a 40% margin, just for the sake of a calculation of an example, that means that every pound of extra income from ancillary is worth, let's say, 33p, taking away the cost of VAT. And so the margin is still small, and that is why I think it's important to keep in mind the effect of discounts on ancillary. So if you are offering things like the 10% off at the bar, 10% off at the cafe, that kind of discount quickly eats into that margin. So that needs to be balanced against the additional demand that discounts may generate. And if you are operating a membership, and let's say that 25% of the membership fee is used to cover the costs, then take out the VAT and taxes, and the margin is about a little less than 60p in the pound. So we're getting to examples where the retained income is a bigger proportion of the pound, where you might want to focus your resources. And finally, if you do get donations and you're eligible for gift aid, then this is the situation where £1 is worth more than £1. So these are the kind of examples of the stuff that we do with organizations under the AAA framework, where we help them uncover the costs of the different verticals, because sometimes each department owns their own verticals, their own areas, and everyone has their own targets and objectives. So but the key to coming up with a way to maximize income will be to figure out which source of income, which stream is more profitable. And so that means looking at the costs as well. And in very practical terms, for a producing theatre, for example, with no membership scheme and a franchised catering operation, the biggest source of profit will come through admissions. And it goes straight to the bottom line. It doesn't have to be split with producers. That's where resources should be focused, versus an arts center that has no membership scheme, although sometimes you can get a little bit of donation money from that. And if you've got you need to split the cost of the ticket income with the producers, so that becomes all about the ancillary. So of course, for that you need people to come through the doors, and who knows when we'll be allowed to go back to full capacity. But this is a case where you can start thinking about using pricing and discounts to some extent on admissions to drive volume as much as we safely will be able to do. But it also becomes in the producer's interest to bring people through the doors and generate more money. And finally, from, let's say, a presenting venue that runs a friend scheme and perhaps runs multiple in-house bars and a cafe, actually the bigger opportunity comes from that membership income. All of these has practical implications, because that means getting your prices right. Because price sits right at the intersection of this model, is just there in the middle of the 3 A's, because what you charge for a ticket, for example, for one area has a direct implication on how much you're saving if you become a member, or from a perception of value point of view, how much it's appropriate to charge for a glass of wine at the bar. So that's why price sits right in the middle of that. And also, because that's why price really does not operate in isolation. It really is not about the £10. Well, sometimes it can be, but in most time, for most cases, it's not about the £10 or the £50 or the £100. The decision as to whether someone will pay the 10, 50, or 100 depends on whether they think it will be worth 10, 50, or 100. So that obviously in the context of their experience, of their income as well. So someone will buy if they believe that the price being charged is balanced by the value that's being offered. So in other words, they will buy if the value if the value that they are getting in return is worth the price that's been asked. And this is important for us today, I think, because we are very often, there are conversations around price, even these days, that are just about price, just about the one end of the scale. Do we need to increase the prices? Do we need to lower the prices? But actually, we should really think about the other side of the scale as well. What can we do in the way of changing the value? Can we increase the value in a way that allows us to increase the price, justify an increase in price? Now, I've got a little cuteness moment for us to lift the spirits, as they say. I don't know if you know what this little creature is. It's an Asian palm civet. And I'm showing you this because this little thing eats, you probably know that, eats coffee cherries, which in turn pass through its system. And then the resulting poo is collected and turned into a coffee that's called kopi luwak. And that coffee that comes through that way retails at nearly 160 pounds per kilo, which is a lot more compared to just regular coffee for, I guess, for something that basically comes from poo. So even if you think that people are crazy, I will never buy that. There's not, there's no way anyone can buy that. Actually, think again, because there is a market for it, and that's because everyone, the price of something is just, the value of something is worth, is just what someone is willing to pay for that. Sort of paraphrasing a famous quote. This has implications for us because it implies that the willingness to pay for something, for including a ticket to the theater, is unique to each of us every time we buy, every time we visit. So in an ideal world, we would charge each person a different price, and that will be their maximum willingness to pay, and everyone will buy, and we will be happy because we will be maximizing income. But obviously that's not either realistic or feasible in the least. So I just wanted to bring up a few concepts that we should keep in mind. First one, if you didn't know that, it's not price, it's about value. So obviously we need to acknowledge that the price is of material importance for some customers. We need to continue to offer affordable price points whenever we can. But crucially, I think people will pay the price if that price matches the value that they get in return. And very much like coffee, there clearly is a lot of value placed on that special coffee. That value, though, it's very, very subjective. That's why it's really difficult to put one price tag to it. And I think actually, speaking of value, it might be there might be an opportunity for us from the reduced capacity and perhaps the reduced number of shows we will be able to put on, because people might not be able to travel that far, will not be allowed to travel that far. So actually the value of the ticket, the value of the art that we offer to our local audiences might actually increase. There might be a scenario where, because there's fewer tickets, fewer shows, you can't travel that far, you come to value what you've got near very highly. And that hopefully justifies a price tag, and that changes accordingly. The second concept is that motivation is what drives bookings, and motivations are unlikely to substantially change. So we might be at a time where these motivations are just shaken. They might not be the same in this past few months, but they will go back to normal. We're ultimately social animals, and we do value what we get through the arts, through theater. So it will go back to normal. And motivations are unique to each visitor each time, and so is their willingness to pay. So if you think about the time that you went to the theater for a birthday or an anniversary, for example, you will probably have had a higher willingness to pay compared to a casual date with friends or a random Wednesday outing. And this is something that we've consistently observed across the sector all the time. So that's why we believe that it will continue to apply beyond this transitional period, during this transitional period, and beyond that as well. So there is a little bit of theory bear with me, to show why all of this is important, how it comes together in practice. And it has to do with price differentiation. The relationship between sales and price, usually for most goods and services, is a negative one. So when the price of something goes up, sales go down, and vice versa. So did I say that right? I think so. There's no getting away from that, again, with very, very few exceptions in terms of the services and goods. And the shape of this relationship between sales and price is known as the price elasticity of demand, which is the curve that you see in this graph. Now, if you only charge one price, then that curve limits the amount of sales that you can generate, because there's just so many people that will pay that price, because our willingness to pay is unique to each of us every time, and then they will be constrained by the many people that will be willing to pay that price. So that means that if you can only sell that many tickets, then there's only that much money that you can generate. But there will be people who will be willing to pay more. And if you also charge a higher price, then there would have been extra income. And similarly, some people could not afford or were not willing to pay that initial price, regardless of how low it was to begin with. So, but they might have purchased if a lower price been available, and that would have been extra money in the form of extra sales. So the point of this in practice is that there is an intrinsic opportunity in offering a range of different prices so that you can tap into all those different levels of willingness to pay and optimize both the volume of tickets that you can sell and the income that you can generate. So this is something that I would encourage you to think about if you haven't already. Do you offer different prices? Could you do more in the way of price differentiation to tap into all those different markets, willingness to pay, levels of willingness to pay? So if prices determine how many tickets you can sell, as explained by this simple chart, then the other very important thing to know is to know what the shape of that curve looks like. Is it steep? Is it flat for your audience or for different segments of your audience? So I just wanted to share an example from the work that we've been doing with several clients, where we were able to estimate the price elasticity of demand, that curve that I showed just now, using a technique called Conjoint Analysis. In this particular case, they were charging £24 for a Saturday evening ticket for a feel-good musical. And with that level of demand, they were making X amount of income that you can see in the blue column. And where it gets interesting is that when they realized that actually the £24 was not their revenue maximizing price. And I guess if there's one reason we're all here today is because we need to maximize income. So the revenue maximizing price for them was actually £30 for this ticket. And you can see that from the height of the pink column, which is a bit taller. And at this price, at a £30 price, demand drops off a little bit. You can see that in the gradient of the black line. But the increase in price from 24 to £30 means that they're generating more money. So, which I think is really interesting in the context also of the fact that we're bracing for a period of reduced demand. So if there's a case where you can generate more money from reduced demand, then hopefully that should be a positive thing. And perhaps an even more interesting result is that the price elasticity of demand is different for different segments. So there's a non-price sensitive segment that would pay even more than £30, and as the name suggests, and there's a segment that we call disinterested, who have just much lower willingness to pay. So understanding how many customers you have in each of those segments becomes really important, because it allows you to offer the right combinations of prices and basically just justify whether it's worth increasing some prices or lowering others. And one final point on this one is, which is why I think this kind of research becomes really useful, is that lowering prices actually in this case, does not generate much additional demand. And obviously that depends on the prices that are being tested, on the profile of your audiences, the geography, and so on. But this is the kind of evidence that helps you make more informed decisions during these times about pricing in particular. We also looked at the Tuesday night price elasticity of demand, or you can say the demand is generally lower, but even on a Tuesday, price could be pushed a little from 2024, I think, to maximize revenue, to just generate a little bit of extra money. And actually lowering prices for Tuesday could generate some additional demand from the price sensitive segment. And so knowing how many you've got of the price sensitives becomes really important to think strategically, is it worth lowering any of the prices? Now, thinking back to that price and value scale and the fact that that needs to be balanced, we always need to keep in mind that any difference in price will need to be justified by a difference in value. So those of you whom we've worked with before will probably remember the importance of value fences. The value fences are just the reason why someone could be asked to pay more, a higher price versus a lower price. So these can be things that you already do. This could be inventory value fences. So paying different prices by product or production or performance, by day of week, time of day, seat location. They could be value fences around customer behavior, so offering incentives to increase frequency or to increase party size or to encourage advanced bookings. Or they could be around demographics, so things like offering special discounts for, I don't know, local residents, families, seniors, young people, and so on. And finally, added value, which means just offering a higher price points if you're including some added value like food and beverage packages, bundled merchandise. And I think things like flexibility as a service can become really quite relevant. So that means, for example, paying a higher price to have the flexibility of exchanging your ticket, for example. And this kind of flexibility, if anything, I mean, from a practical point of view, might become really quite relevant. So it might be good to think about ways to capitalize on that. If anything, because the people are really familiar with the concept already. So if you go and buy a train ticket, you are asked to pay a little more if you want to travel anytime. So if you want more flexibility, then you have to pay a little bit more. And also from concepts that people are familiar with, things like incentives for advanced bookings might be a good one to think about for cash flow reasons, of course. And it might be that actually, as I said before, having fewer shows, fewer tickets available, it might be the case that for some shows that turns into a revenue opportunity because those tickets become more valuable. There's less of it, so it becomes more valuable. So it is challenging. There's no one. I don't think anyone has a perfect recipe for coming back from this. But I think as far as we're concerned, it's a good time now to take a good look at your value fences. Think about the ones that are more relevant to your customers or different segments within your customer base. And think about the ones that encourage the behavior that you want. So if you do want advanced bookings, make sure that your pricing reflects the fact that you prioritize advanced bookings. So I just wanted to just talk about the seat location as a value fence is something that we're probably all thinking about. What a socially distant seating plan might look like. This, I think, has been a hot topic in these past few days, whether that's possible or not. And as we all probably been considering, this is just an example of a hypothetical theater. I think it's got a stall circle, about 1,200 seat capacity. With this configuration and 4 price bands, this theater could generate about £38,000 gross potential for one performance. But if we have to implement any form of social distancing in that seating plan, and let's say we took inspiration from the House of Commons, where MPs have to sit 2 meters apart. So if you go back to your seating plan and take out every other row, every other seat, you'd end up with a really funny looking seating plan. And importantly, that means losing 71% of physical capacity, 71% of gross potential. And I guess suddenly boxes become super popular. But in most cases, as we've read across the sector, a scenario where you lose 70% of gross potential is not viable, depending on the type of show, on your business model. So if that seat location is not a viable value fence anymore, do we need to think about alternative value fences beyond just that? So do we need to revisit the boundaries between the different price bands? Probably we need to start with a blank seating plan and coming up with first with the capacity we're allowed to sell and work out the prices around that. It might even be that we don't allow people to select their own seat anymore. Does that become even a privilege that you can pay a little extra for? So it is definitely a challenge there. And I actually, on this note, Miriam, can I ask you to fire up we had a little poll that we were hoping to have to submit to you. Basically, I mean, it's been a hot topic. Oh, sorry, poll 2. I'm sorry, I should have specified. We just wanted to survey the participants today to see if you're planning to implement a socially distant seating plan, if it's applicable to you, of course. Yes, you're thinking about it. Yes, we modeled it and it works. No, you modeled it and it doesn't work. No, we don't even entertain the idea. So I think you can simply click on the screen and select the option that you prefer. Let us know if you can't see it. And I'm just going to give participants a few seconds to fill it in so that we can all share how do we feel about this. And again, obviously this is something that is very much work in progress. Okay. I don't have a feeling of how long people takes to fill in the poll. Just a few more seconds. Should we close the poll, Miriam? And if you're able to share the results, I think. Okay. Okay. So I think you can all see the results. If not, 56% of you have responded, yes, we're thinking about it. A small percentage, 4%, yes, we modeled it and it works. 25%, no, we modeled and it doesn't work. 15% rejected the idea. It's a real mix. There's obviously no recipe that will fix it, and it will probably change. Looking at the list of participants as well today, it will be different for each of the different business models. Well, one thing about the socially distant seating plan and seat location as a value fence is, let me just close. Is again, rethinking your value fences could be thinking about a secret seat approach. So secret seats, basically the concept of a secret seat is that you pay for a ticket, but you don't get to choose where you sit. And you get allocated a seat on the day of the performance. And this is something that organizations are already doing. We designed it for English National Opera a few years ago. This is just an example from London Symphony Orchestra, where we call them wildcards tickets. So this is a way, I think, is one of the tactics that you could use. There will be many more, but this is about now that you see allocating a seat may become like not letting people choose their seat may become a required necessity now. I mean, this can be an opportunity to again go back to your value fences. What works for you, for your customers, and what also I think operationally what makes more sense if you have to let people through very, very narrow lobbies and foyer. It would be interesting to hear if anyone is any more thoughts on the socially distant seating plan. And on that note, I will hand back over to David. Actually, David, if you request control back from me.
I request control rather than steal control back from you, shall I?
Requested, please.
There you go.
I will approve it.
Hand it over, will you? Okay. Otherwise, you can carry on doing my slides if you like. All right. So I think we should probably return to the kind of the question around the socially distanced auditorium as well. I noticed in the chat that Robert O'Dowd asked, kind of made the point that actually it's critical to move away from a kind of socially distanced auditorium to what kind of is called a safe auditorium, and what that kind of might mean and might look like, because clearly the kind of the financial implications of playing to an audience where you've only got 30% of your house to sell. It's just not viable for so many different organizations, as we saw from the kind of the results of that poll. I think out of the 4% people, 2 people said that we modeled it and it works. So for the vast majority out there, it really does not work. Just carry on, see if I can carry on clicking on this. Let's go back to our kind of our 3 A's. So if admissions is going to be squeezed for whatever reason, if there are some capacity restrictions going forwards, then clearly it kind of puts more pressure on the kind of the other 2 A's to really kind of maximize the income. And because they are all connected, we've kind of seen, that means that the key to maximizing income is being able to kind of optimize your sales across the 3 areas. And that means kind of cross-selling and upselling kind of between each of those different elements. For example, you may use kind of priority booking for a show with a star name to leverage membership sales, or sell the best seats for a show as part of a kind of dinner and show package to leverage some F&B income, or potentially some exclusive merchandise to incentivize and reward donors. So how do we do this? Well, let's kind of think about it from a very commercial point of view, and let's think about supersizing and what that really means. Because really what you want your customers to do is to supersize, to ask for more. I mean, fortunately, in our case, it's not going to kill them, as the kind of McDonald's example here may well do. But it does mean getting people to kind of buy bigger, to buy better, which might be about finding ways to offer the additional value for those people who are willing to pay more to get them to spend more. But also importantly, it means cross-selling across the 3 A's to maximize overall customer spend when they're kind of either during their attendance, maybe that's pre-post show, or even kind of after the show's happened. Is there any other way in which you can connect to kind of generate revenue through the sale of merchandise and generate money through donations? One of the things that so just to kind of look at some of the two of the A's in a bit more detail, if we look at affiliation, for many of you, membership is clearly a part of the offer that you have, where you need to be able to kind of take advantage, certainly kind of going forwards, is that actually for those organizations where membership is hitting your bottom line much more so than any of the other kind of income areas, that really the promotion of that and the cross-selling at any opportunity becomes kind of priority. Museums actually kind of really good at this. So this is just an example from the National Gallery from a recent exhibition, where just clicking on book tickets opened up this kind of pop-up encouraging you to kind of buy a membership. But of course, obviously selling a membership is only really effective if you can offer the benefits that customers are kind of actually looking for. So one of the key benefits might actually be kind of access to the best seats in the house, especially if there is a reduced capacity house in whatever form that takes. So here's just an example of a kind of pre-crisis example from the States. This is from Center Theatre Group in Los Angeles, and what they have done in their auditorium is hold off a bunch of exclusive seats with the kind of best views, and they're only available for kind of VIPs, people who have donated a certain amount, and because CTG is in LA and LA has a lot of A-list actors for its performances, if you want one of those seats, you're going to have to pay $2,500 for the privilege, and people really do pay it, even if they don't come to anything else. So where there is demand, and there are ways in which you can kind of leverage that, then there are income opportunities. So just going back to the UK, one of the things that we kind of touched on earlier with the kind of example of not every pound is equal is the example of the donation with the additional kind of 25% gift aid. So there are rules that obviously need to be met to claim gift aid in whatever capacity, but memberships do allow you the opportunity to claim gift aid on the value of a membership, provided those rules are met. So clearly the member has to be a UK taxpayer. Just click on this here. But then as long as the kind of the maximum value of the benefits kind of falls under these criteria here, so if it's the membership is up to £100, then the value of the benefit can only be 25% for you to be able to claim gift aid on the whole amount. If it's above £100, then you've got 25% of the £100 and then 5% for every pound above that. So it's slightly less kind of cumulatively as you go up. So if we take a kind of typical example of what a membership might look like, here's a kind of fairly standard set of benefits that a lot of organizations offer. So there's some sort of ticket discount, say 10% off, there's priority booking, maybe 10% off some the ancillary, and an annual event, and kind of, yeah, so really standard basic kind of offer. Then if we look at what those might cost, there we go. So if we take the kind of the first one, 10% off tickets, if you work out that the average member is spending £135 on their tickets, and they're getting their 10% discount, that means that they're roughly saving, well, they're saving £15 on average. Priority booking, there's no cost of benefit involved there, so that doesn't count towards the overall cost of the benefit. 10% off cafe, again, it's a kind of analysis of what is the saving per member. So if you know their average spend, and then you can work out what the saving means, that's £22.50 in this case, so £2.50 saving. And then the annual event, whilst it doesn't cost the member anything, the way that you need to calculate the cost of the benefit for the purposes of gift aid is the event cost per head. So if your event costs roughly £1,500 and there are 200 members, that's £7, and then 200 members, then that's £7.50 per head. So the total is £25. Now, in order to kind of claim gift aid on that, if we go back to what we were seeing earlier, if it's 25% of £100 membership, then you're needing to charge a kind of minimum price for that membership of £100. So that's fairly expensive and probably not feasible. But we can see actually the most expensive cost of benefit there is the saving per member. So actually, if you then were to create a different type of membership and remove the saving per member from it, then the cost of benefit suddenly drops to £10. And so clearly at 25%, the cost of benefits, the minimum price for a membership here to claim gift aid would be £40, which may be a slightly more attractive proposition. And so it is worth thinking about whether you can make any kind of small adjustments to your membership that might mean that you can claim gift aid, and certainly kind of revisit what you're currently doing to obviously try and maximize that income as much as possible. And at the very least, if you don't have a membership, then potentially consider the possibility of introducing just a very basic, even priority booking only membership that you can claim gift aid on. So let's talk about ancillary as well. Potentially there are kind of ways to maximize revenue through your ancillary offer, especially if you're kind of now operating a kind of reduced capacity venue. Obviously the kind of that needs to apply to any ancillary restaurant, bar area that you've got available as well. So I guess depending on who controls your catering, if you have one, and how much of the ticket income you're retaining, then the right package could actually make more money than kind of selling each individual item. So if you can create kind of restaurant packages and meals, then there's a kind of advantage to selling those as a bundled package, Plus, there's the added benefit if you can get customers to commit in advance, that allows you to kind of control the inventory and kind of manage safely the kind of space in which they would then be able to kind of enjoy their ancillary kind of food and drink. This is actually a really old example here from Malmo Opera, but just I think it's worth sharing as it kind of also demonstrates another reason to think about creating packages. So what they were doing several years ago is that they decided to put on a musical for the first time, and it actually had a big star name. I think it was someone from a reality TV show, and they weren't really sure how to price the musical, but they kind of went and priced it slightly below the opera, except for they held off a kind of, well, they held off a small number of seats, but they put them then on sale at top price, along with a meal package that you had to buy if you were buying those seats. And what they actually found was that there was such strong demand that those seats actually immediately sold out. And what they discovered in addition is that actually when people turned up for the show, they had no idea that they'd purchased a meal, or they didn't care that they'd purchased a meal with their ticket. They were just paying that much for the single show. The value of the ticket then was massively increased. The kind of price, the value of the ticket alone was worth the kind of the big increase. So they were able to kind of learn about that kind of price elasticity of demand for those non-price sensitive customers, that they found an opportunity to push and to maximize the price from those people who were willing to pay. They did actually subsequently reprice their kind of musical tickets higher than opera going forwards. But it also kind of brings me on to one other point to kind of make about pricing in kind of relation to the kind of reopening in particular. So the fact that they put a price in Malmo Opera for their musical, which was twice the price of any other price there, it kind of acts as an anchor so that everything else, all of the other prices, are kind of considered relative to it, which kind of sets the context for then how you see how much something is worth. But one of the interesting things about anchors is that actually they can be quite random, and they can be just as effective if it's quite arbitrary. And this works due to an effect that's kind of technically called priming. So there's an example from the Exploratorium, which is a kind of museum in San Francisco, where they actually did an experiment to test this. So they were asking visitors to make a kind of annual contribution donation. And before they were asked, some were asked an anchoring question, such as, would you be willing to pay $5? And then they were asked how much after that they would be willing to contribute. So when people weren't asked initially any anchor question, they averaged $64 as a kind of contribution on average. When the anchor was the lower $5, then contributions dropped to $20 on average. But when the anchor, they changed it randomly to $400, the contribution averaged $143. So I think, the amount of income definitely depends on the kind of customer's willingness to pay, but being able to kind of guide and encourage your customers to spend more by setting anchors certainly then helps them understand really what the value of something is that they're then getting in return for the price that they're paying, which clearly is going to be really important when we reopen. And the danger is that obviously if you reopen at a kind of much lower price, it could take years to kind of get back to that kind of pre-crisis price points that you were previously enjoying. So we're kind of getting towards the end of our session now, and as we think about kind of lifting the kind of the curtains again, I should kind of take a look at the possible timeline going forward. So clearly right now we're in lockdown. People can't leave their homes. We're still closed. We're facing kind of unprecedented challenges in terms of cash flow and staffing. There are travel restrictions in place, which obviously affects kind of connectivity. We don't really know when we'll be able to reopen. Obviously, the UK government in particular has got announcements forthcoming. there's been talk amongst kind of some of the names in the industry who have been interviewed recently. So I'm just thinking of Rufus Norris, the kind of artistic director of the National Theatre, where he was talking on the kind of the BBC's Today programme a few days ago, thinking that the best case scenario could be January 2021, but they're obviously looking into other ways of opening before that, if it is safe to do so. And I think Cameron McIntosh has been on kind of interviewed recently as well, saying that actually socially distancing seating plans just not viable, and alternatives will need to be found in order for them to reopen and for them to make money again. But obviously it's clear that kind of by now it's not going to be business as usual. So if we're going to reopen sooner rather than later, it clearly means adapting to the situation as it unfolds, which may involve operating at reduced capacity, dealing with various operational challenges, ensuring safe social distancing, potentially that kind of pivot towards a local audience. But even then beyond that, I guess the kind of big questions are when restrictions might be fully lifted, what does that kind of new normal look like? And I'm not saying that we can kind of answer that now. We're still in the kind of there are still too many unknowns to kind of to be able to address those kind of questions. But I think one of the kind of the key things for the kind of the industry at the moment is its ability to adapt quickly and to kind of try however it can to kind of navigate through a phased kind of return to kind of selling tickets and bringing people safely into the venues again. So just to kind of summarize what we have talked about today. So going back to that original diagram, the Neven framework, where we're kind of living in these unprecedented times, we're kind of acting in chaos, but as we act, we still need to take time to assess the kind of implications of our actions and to kind of analyze and respond. And importantly, kind of focusing on the kind of three key sources of earned customer income. So the kind of the AAA, the admissions, the ancillary, the affiliation. And then thinking really about what the implications are for each of them as we move towards a new normal. Adapting your strategy, so adapt being a really, really important word here, in order to kind of drive upsells and cross sales, which are going to kind of make the kind of the biggest difference to the bottom line, remembering that kind of not every pound is equal. And then also ensuring that you're creating the kind of the relevant value for the kind of the customers and what they're looking for. So as people return to thinking about going to the theatre again, has their, what are their motivations? Have they changed? What value are they looking for? And ensuring that that then is integrated in your kind of CRM strategy so that you're communicating effectively and potentially kind of reassuring that people that it is safe to return to the theatres. So that just kind of brings us back to the kind of two more forthcoming webinars that we've got for you and your colleagues to join. Robin and I will be delivering a session on segmentation, so addressing that kind of final point on the 26th of May, and then Francesca and Robin will be taking talking about planning and forecasting in the middle of June, when hopefully we might have a better indication of where we're likely, when we're likely to be able to reopen and under what conditions. And say in the meantime, we've been kind of thinking about how we can help the industry at Baker Richards with kind of a few other kind of different ways of addressing kind of the situation. So the kind of thing that I think is getting a lot of traction right now is that kind of understanding price sensitivity, as then you start to think about the implications for pricing when they reopen and how willingness to pay has changed. So if anyone's interested, then obviously please do talk to us. And so it just remains to say thank you for listening and for sticking with us.
And thank you very much from me and the participants, David and Francesca. It was a great really great webinar. Thank you for that. I think some of the things that resonated with me that may resonate with some of the people listening, I think, you know, being able to use lockdown as an opportunity to think differently, whether in terms of pricing or value and perception of value. I think a lot of people often, if they haven't tried, you know, dynamic pricing, have been thinking about it for a while, and maybe this is an opportunity for them to start looking at that now. It is, as you mentioned, it has been chaotic, but that idea of acting in chaos, but taking time to assess, analyze, and respond, I thought was really nice. So that we don't just have to rush back into what we always used to do. The world will be different when we reopen. So it's trying to use this time and use information like you presented to think differently. You mentioned adapting your strategy. So it's sort of same idea, isn't it, really? It's like you may have a really big plan, a big strategy in place, but we're going to have to be very agile and adjust to what the future holds. I think that the idea of sort of socially distanced seating is clearly going to be challenging. I think Robert put it in a nice way, sort of trying to move perhaps from the idea of socially distanced seating to safe seating. That may be the only sort of financially viable way of doing it. And there's just something that's one of the questions that was actually answered that I just thought was quite interesting. Someone was asking about streaming content and saying it only works if you own the content, but not so useful if you're a receiving venue. But I mean, something I've seen someone talking about is, you know, if you're touring a show, can you potentially stream the content from your theatre to a sort of a defined catchment group? So whether it's only people on your database, you know, or can you still sell a ticket to the streamed version, but only while it's at your venue? So you could still have a live component, but also potentially a sort of a stream component as well, just to basically make up the numbers. So again, I think there's an opportunity, even though there's a lot of sort of grimness about everything that's going on. There's ways in which we can look at this as an opportunity and try not to sort of let it beat us down, I suppose. Anyway, that's my reflections. There's a few questions. I think there were some actually, just to go to the ones that people had sent in first, the ones that had been sent in advance. There was one about membership schemes and adding incentives to sort of buy into the scheme while we're closed. So I suppose, I mean, you did obviously talk about some ideas for different approaches to membership schemes and different ways of presenting and positioning them. Is there anything that springs to mind that could be done in the interim? Because of course, you know, while there aren't generally, you know, shows now, as you mentioned, some shows are sort of some theatres are selling for shows further ahead. Is there anything that particularly venues and some touring companies can be doing to incentivize people to sign up to memberships now? Is there anything that springs to mind in that area?
Slightly, that's Francesca. I think one of the things with memberships right now is that it's obviously one of the attractions of a membership normally is that you get great benefits. So it comes back to what are the benefits that people would get right now. If you can't offer kind of discounts on tickets because your shows aren't on sale, then being able to use that as a leverage to sell memberships is perhaps not the kind of the best option. I saw some research recently that came from actually some research that was commissioned by ALVA, the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions, where they were looking at kind of people's willingness to return to kind of visitor attractions, and the kind of the messaging around membership was that people were at this stage more willing to kind of show their support for organizations. So that pivot away from trying to kind of sell memberships as a kind of transactional kind of option and more as a philanthropic, obviously right now has probably much more traction. I've also seen organizations kind of sell a different type of membership, so where they have the ability, and obviously some of the comments have been around that if you're, as Sebastian was saying, if you're a receiving house and you don't have the access to the stream content to provide, then a membership which includes access to those things might not be applicable. But certainly kind of one of the clients we started working recently, San Francisco Jazz, have launched a digital membership scheme, which is really interesting because it's just $5 a month, and it's a kind of monthly fee based on the fact that it can then be shut down well, whenever things return maybe to normal. So it's not a big commitment. And with the $5 a month, they just give you access to kind of, I think, 4 free shows a month. So it's just thinking about what you have at your kind of disposal at this point in time as to what then you could offer people, and find ways in kind of connecting with them, whether that's through the support message or through some other kind of content that you can deliver.
And then there was also, like, I think, also thinking back about that Alva research, there's some research being done showing that people obviously at the moment are feeling quite altruistic, and that they want to support the sector, they want to give, and you can see that, you know, the people supporting their neighbors and volunteering and things like that. So in terms of understanding, figuring out how many of your customers or potential audiences are driven by that support message, rather than, as they were saying, a transactional one, that might actually be a really good time for that, knowing if it's worth it or not. Otherwise you just end up undermining any other initiatives you've got going on. And that, I guess, there was a question about the fact that the local authorities obviously don't apply for gift aid, but if there's ways that you can leverage that affiliation to keep that core of customers engaged and get them to donate a little bit more, that ultimately should be a positive result. And people are feeling like they're looking for outlets to donate and support, especially the arts.
Great, thank you. Another question here sent in advance. This is, how do we reassure different segments of our audience that it is safe to invest, in inverted commas, in a ticket again? Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, there's a sort of survey that Katie Rains from Indigo is doing at the minute in terms of consumer confidence. But this question seems to be more about the sort of, almost like the investment bit of it. It's not just the safety. It's actually, you know, if you've got some money and you're thinking about how to spend it, how do we try and influence, persuade consumers that investing in a ticket is just that. It's a good investment.
I was thinking back to that flexibility as service kind of value fence. If it's very uncertain times, it might be that having things like the option to exchange your tickets, the option to the thing that some visitor attractions do in the way of like guarantees, as in you buy that flexible ticket and you can attend any day. If it rains, you can attend some other day. So reflecting that flexibility in your pricing could be a way of signaling we are investing in our product, in the art that we provide. You should as well, and come with us and buy tickets. You'll have a great time whenever we open.
Great, thank you. We have a question here from Rob McPherson about branding and value, linking with coffee, possibly to do with your Kopi Luwak coffee. Maybe it was inspired by that. Sort of talking about how, yeah, I mean, he's referencing coffee in terms of like Nespresso pods and Starbucks and Sainsbury's. Effectively, it's the same sort of thing, but obviously branding is the thing that makes the difference, and positioning. So Rob's question is, in normal times, how can a theatre make itself distinctive enough to charge considerably more than others with confidence? And right now, are too many giving away too much for free and storing up difficulties?
So this is interesting because clearly right now there are a lot of challenges, and there's the unprecedented times that we live in mean that we are, as I said earlier, just kind of acting and seeing what works and what doesn't, and really being able to understand what it is that you need to do going forwards will take some time to kind of figure out. What's interesting though is that what people have said in surveys about that kind of willingness to kind of maybe return to theatres, and then what they might do in practice actually could be very different. So I've actually seen some examples where theatres have gone on sale with shows or events kind of in the future, so kind of looking October, November time, and actually have sold really well, simply because the product is right and people are willing to pay for it. So it is about getting the product right, and where there is that demand for that product, then finding that kind of appropriate price to charge, and responding to those kind of fluctuations in demand and what it is that people are actually kind of seeking. So I'm not sure if that answers the question. I think it's a kind of, clearly it's a challenge, and giving away too much for free, potentially. I mean, as Francesca was saying earlier, free is a kind of great for potentially reaching the audiences, but for translating and turning that free kind of content into something which you can monetize is much more of a challenge. And if we are thinking about being able to monetize things like live streaming in whatever capacity going forwards, then there's clearly a need to be able to start doing that now and shifting away from the kind of the free model that's currently being used.
I think the key maybe is confidence. Like Rob was writing, it's about communicating that you've thought it through, and then you know that it's safe to reopen. There was some research being done about what would make people feel. Obviously that changes every time probably, but what will make people feel safe to come back? And the fact that theaters or organizations reopen makes people feel safe, even if maybe nothing's changed. But the projecting, sending out a message that we know what we're doing, we've got measures in place, we are complying with the requirements, that confidence, and if that confidence is coordinated across the sector, then it sends a powerful message that you can come back, you'll be safe, and that in that sense the value what you're getting justifies perhaps a higher price, given that you also maybe will be fewer tickets, fewer shows, and for this special benefit of having that experience safely, that also has implications for perhaps charging higher prices.
Yeah. Well, I'm just looking at the time. We're nearly out of time, I'm afraid. There are a few more questions, but I think what I might suggest people do, you can see on the screen, so there's David and Francesca's emails. So if there's anything specifically that they've covered today that we haven't had a chance to answer, do please get in touch with them. Or obviously there's the Baker Richards website, which is baker-richards.com. I want to say a huge thank you to David and Francesca for their time and preparing this amazing presentation and making it so relevant to the current challenges that we're all facing. So thank you so much. Just a reminder that the webinar will be circulated to all attendees, and it's going to be on theatremeansbusiness.info in the archive section. A couple more webinars we've got coming up this week. On Tuesday, so that's tomorrow at 2 p.m, Dawn Farrow is presenting Planning for Change, Essential Skills for a Financially Robust and Happy Future. And then on Monday, 11th of May, Maria Pattinson is covering supporting mental resilience in the performing arts during COVID-19. We've got many more, so do visit the website for more information. And just to say thank you so much for everyone for taking part in this, our first webinar. Thank you so much.